Another drag show event was held in a hotel in Florida, and DeSantis had decided to revoke the hotel's liquor license. Now, a liquor license, if people don't understand, that there's a bigger margin on alcoholic drinks than there are in the food and other beverages when you're part of a restaurant facility. So this hotel most likely had a restaurant within their hotel, and potentially they're offering drinks and other types of foods and beverages to people when they host events. And DeSantis took a look at what was happening in this hotel and said, we're going to take away your liquor license. Now, from the onset, this looks like a good decision because we know that there's a lot of people who are speaking out against drag shows, especially when there are kids involved. But revoking a liquor license, first and foremost, that's unconstitutional. There should not even be a liquor license to begin with. The Constitution does not disavow any kind of substances. In fact, it's the opposite. You have the ability to use a substance. Let me give a very prime example. So right now we have a ton of narcotics that are on the federal regulation substance ban list. And there's different schedules, Schedule 1, Schedule 2, all that. The higher up you go in the schedule, like Schedule 1, says there is no recreational or medicinal benefit to using this. And that's how the federal government classifies them. And then you have the DEA, the Drug Enforcement Administration agency, and they come in and they enforce the schedules. So if we look at prohibition, so 1920s, 1930s, we had the federal government come in and pass an amendment to the Constitution that said you can no longer distribute, sell alcohol. Then they had to repeal the amendment when no one followed the constitutional amendment. Everyone was drinking like crazy. There were speakeasies. Mixed drinks were created at that time. Even NASCAR was a derivative of that situation. They got regular looking cars and beefed up the engines, and they would use that to transport alcohol to different establishments, and they would get away from the police. So no one followed that. The federal government had to repeal that. The legislative branch had to repeal it. But for all the other substances, there was no constitutional amendment. So there's no consistency within the law. Now, if we're using the Constitution, you have a right to use these substances because we come from a libertarian/conservative republic. That's what we were bred out of. In fact, a lot of our founding fathers grew substances and sold them or used them at their discretion. You're an individual. You have the right to do what you want with your body so long as it does not infringe on another person's individual rights. Now, if you have a liquor license, that's already presenting yourself as, it's presenting itself as the government has a say in what you're going to sell and distribute. And that's not okay because you're interfering with free market capitalism. Two parties are exchanging voluntarily with each other, and the federal government is coming in and intervening themselves, or I guess in this state, the state. I will say that we have to put the Constitution first, even though there are certain incidents like drag shows where kids are being allowed. We have to put the Constitution at the forefront. That's the only thing that separates we the people from those who are trying to take over this nation with their own set of ideals and really just climb to the top of the hierarchy using American values and then take the ladder that they climbed up on and throw away the ladder so no one can catch up to them, no one can compete with them. They want to create a barrier so no one can actually make money, build a business, and take their spot. So in other nations, it's very hard to have a meritocracy because most other nations do not have a meritocracy. It's very hard to go up and down the socioeconomic ladder. By design, it's created that way so that the upper echelon, the elites, they make it very difficult for the average person to compete, even if you're in the middle class. America is slightly different. We have the ability to compete if you're at the lower class, the middle class, or the upper class. You can move up and down that ladder. The problem is people want more and more power. They want to secure their power, their wealth. They want to secure themselves. So they have to create a barrier to prevent you from entering, whether they're a company, whether they're an individual, whether they're a politician. It doesn't really matter. If we look at the situation, there is a nuance to this. Parents are 50, if you have two parents, a man and a woman, they are 50% each of that child's DNA. So there is a nuance with the type of discretion. People may agree or disagree with how certain parents guide their children, whether they allow them to watch a violent movie or rated R movie. We may not agree with that, but they do have that nuanced discretion of that is technically them. That's 50% of them. And if you combine both parents, that's 100% of them. Now, when that kid is having his rights infringed on, whether he's 1 year old or 5 years old, now it becomes an issue where the state intervenes. But if it's just guidance of this is the type of content I want him to watch, this is the type of X, Y, and Z ideology I want him to adopt until he's 18, look, that may screw up the child. I 100% agree with a lot of people out there who say that may screw up the child. But those parents do have that type of discretion. The only time the state should intervene is when there's an infringement of rights. And the same goes for people on the right. The same goes for if you're a conservative. You also want to be able to guide your children towards a certain ideology, towards a certain way of thinking, a certain perspective of the world. Imagine if people on the left said the state should come in, intervene, and say you can't teach your kids that because that hurts other people's feelings or whatever reasoning that they're giving you. You would say, well, I'm a parent, I can use my discretion. And then when they're 18, they can make their own decision. So it goes both ways. We have to understand that there's a lot of discretion that comes with that DNA nuance, and not a lot of people take that into account. If we look at what really matters here, how we actually change what's happening here, it comes down to culture. It comes down to adjusting the way people think, because just if we pass a law, just if we change regulation, or let's say you pass some executive orders as a governor or as a president, you might have some people who follow it, you might not. And imposing an authoritarian rule doesn't usually work out long term in terms of there's a certain equilibrium that has to be met within the population. Once that equilibrium is broken, once that threshold is broken, then people revolt and you lose your authoritarian status. Someone new comes in, you have to resign, you get assassinated, whatever the result is, you ultimately have to make sure that there's an equilibrium that is met within the people. If you're dealing with people in a democratic nation, a constitutional republic, you must adjust, and this is really for any nation, but other nations are harsher the way they go about it because they don't value individual rights as much as we do here in America. You have to adjust people's culture. Now, the left has done a really good job at adjusting culture by emotionally manipulating people. The right doesn't do a good job of using emotion and storytelling. The right does a good job with logical thinking, but most people revert to their primitive choice of using emotional thinking to make a decision. Even if you're coming from a logical point of view, you're still using that logical point of view as a proxy, as a middleman for your emotional decision. So let me give an example. You may have an idea of, I want to help my family. Okay, I want to be able to buy them a house, support them. I need to make X amount of money to be able to do that. Then you take logical steps to make sure that you can build that kind of wealth. Now, you wanting to support your family is an emotional decision. Logically speaking, there's no reason to support your family. I mean, there's no objective reason. It's all subjective. You're using emotion to make that decision. But we take logical steps to get there. That's what we need to understand about culture. Culture all comes down to emotional appeal. There's plenty of things on the right that make 100% logical sense. But if we use storytelling and emotion, now you can garnish people's attention. Most people, whether it's, if we're looking at young children, high school, college age students, or the majority of women, or we look at minorities, we're seeing people who are not getting the right messaging from the right. They're getting a very boring, bland messaging, and there's no emotion. There's no storytelling. There's no excitement there. They don't see firsthand what they're getting, what the benefits are. They're hearing a lot of things about what's going to happen in 10, 15 years. They don't really see anything that's imminent. The left also does a very good job at using the fear-mongering reaction. Well, they're trying to evoke that reaction, right? By using fear-mongering, they're evoking a certain reaction. And they will create events and stories and narratives that hit people with imminent threat, or I need to make an imminent decision. And therefore, that individual forgoes their cognitive thinking, and they just make a quick decision, which typically results in giving up their individual rights for a form of security. So let's also tie this into another agenda. Why is this culturally adjusted agenda, this distorted agenda, happening where we're seeing these drag shows and parents are bringing their kids to these drag shows? Well, at the top of the hierarchies, you have certain institutions, certain people, certain factions, certain niches. They often control the culture. They control the narrative. They distribute it through the media and other forms of media, not just mainstream media, but it could be articles on the internet, through independent creators, controlled opposition. There are many different examples. They want to see a world where, and I'm going to list out a few different perspectives here because there's different ideologies at the top. They don't always agree with each other, even though they have the same implementation. Some want to reduce the population. Some want only specific people to exist. Some want the people who are mentally strong to exist. And so let's use the last example I gave. If you are a parent and you're so easily influenced by society and culture that you have a distorted way of thinking of, I should bring my 10-year-old kid to a drag show event, you are indirectly doing the bidding of the person at the top or the institution at the top who wants the weak-minded people to be rooted out. Because when you bring your kid to that event and your kid has 50% of your DNA, and so he or she is predisposed to a certain way of thinking, which may not be conducive towards his or her reproduction, so the next generation can be created, you are now naturally selecting yourself out of the gene pool. And thus, that weak-minded individual, this is all theoretical, that weak-minded individual no longer exists. And so that institution that wanted that perspective implemented now got what they wanted. Now, of course, the majority of people are not going to think about, oh, yeah, there's these different perspectives and different ideologies of people at the top who have power, wealth, influence, and they pursued a route to get there because they wanted to implement their worldview onto the population. But if you just look at history, we know about eugenics in America and Britain. We know what happened during World War II. We know about all these different incidents. But people fail to connect the dots and think that we, in 2023, as humans, are so different. No matter if it's 1940 or 2023 or the year 3000, so long as we are Homo sapiens, unless we completely evolve in such a different direction, we will always have the same typical similar traits, and you will have a subset of the population who has a distorted ideology, but they are intelligent. Yet their distorted ideology, if you look at it from I suppose this is all subjective, but if you look at it from the objective stance of we want to have the world populate and create more unique people, and we have enough resources to do so, their ideology is malicious towards that objective goal. So these people do exist. There are people who are very intelligent. They are charismatic to an extent. And they will have a certain ideology that is maybe they themselves had, I don't want to say originally thought of, but they have the first generation creation of the idea, or it's been passed down through generations. And they are in a position where they can implement that ideology to an extent. And they can work with different institutions, different people, different networks to an extent. And if you're just an average person and you have a 9-to-5 and you're easily manipulated by the media or by Hollywood, by entertainment, you're peer pressured, which a lot of people are, you will ultimately take the next generation that you've created and put them in a worse off situation. I want to give a very simplistic example of this. Most people have no idea what they should be eating ancestrally. If we look at what our ancestors ate, and actually what is most optimal, not what they just ate, but what is most optimal. Of course, our ancestors, they tried to find anything that they could. Even the fruits and vegetables that existed 50,000 years ago are completely different than the fruits and vegetables we have now. The fruits and vegetables we have now are artificially bred to be bigger, sweeter, have more sugars, have more calories. Whereas if we go back in time, it was not even the case. Full of seeds, very bitter, depending on the fruit or vegetable. And we really didn't go after vegetables until the agricultural revolution, where we could plant them. You have some vegetables that we could garnish and find roots and tubulars and things like potatoes. But our ancestors were optimized to consume meat, and they had also evolved to break down fibrous plant material like fruits and vegetables, because that was an adaptation in order to survive, in order to not die from famine. But most people, if you look at the medical journals, there's a lot of medical journals that have actually come corrected now, but if you talk to a bunch of doctors, you get multiple perspectives. A large majority of the doctors will say, high cholesterol, if you have a certain amount of cholesterol, it's bad, certain amount of saturated fat, it's bad, stay away from red meat too much, that's not good for you. They don't understand just basic nutrition. And so when you are getting this information from a deemed authority figure and you pass it down, you not only take the information, but you also pass it down to your children. You're putting them in a worse off situation, and you take society and you scale it. Even when that child is 18 and they can do their own research, they might never find the truth of what they should actually be eating for a healthier lifestyle. They may never know what their diet should look like. And so they may even fall for false advertising of, oh, look at this super low fat snack, banana chips, whatever the snack is. And this is supposed to be a healthy alternative to junk food when it itself is junk food. There are plenty of examples of this. People still, I won't say the name of the companies, but people still drink sugary fruit beverages that are supposed to hydrate you after sports. That's counterproductive towards the goal. There's some electrolytes, and of course it will hydrate you, but you're adding so much glucose, fructose, etc., that you're raising your blood sugars, and you're spiking your insulin, and you're putting your pancreas, you're putting more work on your pancreas, and you don't want to be. Now, we do have insulin for a reason, to cover the high spike in glucose in blood, but that's an adaptation to be able to eat certain foods to survive. It's not necessarily optimal. So there's a lot of information out there. If you just take it and you don't sit and think about it, you don't gain multiple perspectives, you don't do your research, you will be fooled, and you will pass it on to the next generation, and the next generation won't be as healthy, won't be as optimized, won't be as successful compared to what they could be.